Story number 1. The Grayson Asylum had been abandoned for nearly 3 decades. Located deep in the woods on the outskirts of a forgotten town, it stood like a corpse that refused to decay. When the hospital finally reopened as a modern mental health facility, locals whispered warnings, but progress demanded silence. Dr. Lena Morell had heard the stories: patients disappearing, nurses found mutilated, a priest who went mad after spending one night in the chapel ward. She didn't believe any of it. A Harvard-educated psychologist, she prided herself on logic and science. The rumors, she assumed, were the ghosts of a time when the mentally ill were chained to walls and treated like animals. Grayson had changed. Clean halls, reinforced safety systems, a new generation of staff except one wing, the East Wing. It had been sealed since 1987. And the 6th floor, the top floor, was condemned. Officially. Unofficially, it was used for long-term isolation. Only a few of the staff even knew how to get up there. The elevator didn't reach it. You had to take the stairs behind the archives. Dr. Morell first heard about room 616 from an orderly named Davis, a nervous, pale man who had worked there far too long. Patients whisper about it in their sleep, he said one night during shift change. One of them tried to gouge his eyes out, said he saw the room staring at him through the walls. She laughed it off, until she started noticing things herself. It began with her patient files. Scribbled drawings in margins, always a room with a number on the door, 616. Always a dark figure standing just outside it. One evening, her computer began glitching. Every time she clicked a file, the screen flickered and showed a grainy, static-laced image of a corridor lined with doors. The number 616 blinked in red. She ran diagnostics. Nothing was wrong with the system. Then the dreams began. She was walking the 6th floor, though she had never seen it. The walls were peeling, smeared with handprints. The lights flickered with a sound like breathing. At the end of the corridor stood room 616. Always closed, always humming. She'd wake drenched in sweat, the hum still vibrating in her skull. She stopped sleeping. One night, a code black was called. A patient had gone missing from a locked room. A sweep of the hospital found nothing. Cameras cut out just before the disappearance. The last footage showed the patient staring at the wall, whispering, "She's waiting in 616. That was enough for Lena. She demanded to see the 6th floor. The other doctors refused, so she went alone. At 2:16 a.m., she accessed the old stairwell behind the archives. It stank of mold and dust, the kind that sinks into your skin. She climbed, her flashlight beam trembling with each step. The 6th floor was colder than it should have been. Dark, silent. The doors on either side had been scratched and dented from the inside. Long nail marks, dried blood. She counted the numbers as she passed. 610, 611, 612. 616 stood at the end. Its door was a different color. Darker, like it had been burned and scrubbed clean. The air around it shimmered with cold. Her hand trembled as she reached for the handle. Turned easily. Inside, the walls were covered in mirrors. Floor to ceiling. Cracked. Some shattered. The floor was wet, though there were no leaks. The air smelled like sulfur and iron. And in the center of the room sat an old hospital bed. Strapped to it was a figure. A woman. Thin. Emaciated. Eyes wide and gleaming. She looked exactly like Lena. The woman turned to look at her and smiled. "You finally came back," she whispered. Lena stumbled backward. She didn't remember walking into the room. But now the door was gone. Only mirrors surrounded her. Infinite reflections of herself and of the woman on the bed. "Don't you remember?" the woman said. "You locked me in here." Lena screamed for help, pounded the walls, but the mirrors didn't show her moving. Her reflection stayed still, smiling. Then the light bulbs burst. Darkness. When she awoke, she was lying on the bed, straps around her arms and legs, cold, unmoving. And in the mirrors she saw herself standing by the door, watching. She tried to scream but had no voice. The version of her at the door turned and walked away. Then the mirrors began to shift. They showed other people. former patients, doctors, all staring, pressed to the glass, their mouths wide in silent agony. And in each mirror, Lena was the one on the outside, the one who had trapped them. She was the warden of room 616, and now she was one of the inmates. The next morning, the hospital records showed nothing. No Dr. Lena Morel. No entry to the 6th floor. Her office was empty. Her name badge, gone. When Davis checked the archives that night, he found a new patient file on his desk. It read, Morel, Lena. Status, permanent isolation, room 616. And beneath it, a handwritten note. The house remembers its own. Story number 2. Nurse Olivia Hart was transferred to Black Hollow Medical Center in November, during the thick of winter. The hospital had a reputation that wasn't discussed openly. Patients died unexpectedly, machines malfunctioned without reason, and staff rotated out faster than most jobs in the city. But Olivia was desperate. Her younger sister was sick, and she needed the money. The hospital itself was massive, built in the early 1900s, with Gothic stonework and long, sterile corridors that never seemed to end. Despite the new equipment and fresh coats of paint, something about Black Hollow always felt ancient wrong. She was assigned to Ward 9C, also called the Silence Ward by longtime staff. It had once been the hospital's psychiatric unit, but had long since been shut down after a fire in the 1980s. Now, it served as an overflow ward, housing patients who were in medically induced comas or in long-term vegetative states. They never spoke. They never moved. They just existed. Olivia's first shift began quietly. She checked monitors, adjusted IVs, and charted vitals. The hallway lights flickered occasionally, and she was told by senior staff that the wiring on that floor was temperamental. But by midnight, the strangeness began. She noticed patient 94B, an elderly man named Charles Fenwick, sitting upright in his bed. His eyes were wide open. He was supposed to be comatose. She called for a doctor, but by the time he arrived, Charles was flat on the bed again, eyes closed, breathing steady. The doctor shrugged. Stress happens. That night, she dreamed she was walking through 9C, but the hallway never ended. The lights above her buzzed and popped. Each room she passed held patients with mouths sewn shut. Some were banging their heads against walls. Others stood silently in corners, eyes white, skin pale like wax. When she woke up, she had a nosebleed and long scratches down her thigh. Her second night, the machines in 9C began beeping in unison. All 12 of them. Olivia checked each one, but the patients were stable. No vitals had changed. And yet, the heart monitors flatlined and resumed again in perfect rhythm, like a silent countdown. At 2:07 a.m., every light in the ward shut off. Pitch black. She flicked on her flashlight and found herself standing face to face with patient 103D, a woman who had been brain dead for 7 years. The woman's eyes were open. Her lips moved soundlessly. When Olivia leaned closer, she heard whispering, dozens of overlapping voices pouring from the woman's throat like a static-filled recording. We never left. We never slept. We see you. Olivia stumbled backward. The flashlight flickered, and when the beam returned, the patient was unconscious again. Unmoving. Her vitals had not changed. Security reviewed the footage. It showed Olivia standing alone in the ward, talking to no one. No one believed her. On her third shift, she came in early. She had done her research. All 12 patients in 9C had been admitted the same month, over 25 years ago before the fire. Their files were inconsistent. Missing entries, erased names, handwritten edits in red ink. Each had been admitted for something called clinical possession disorder. No such diagnosis existed in modern medicine. One file had a final, cryptic note, bound by silence, contained by faith. If they speak, the doors will open. That night, Olivia brought a crucifix and a recorder. She placed the device on the counter in the middle of the ward and whispered, "If you're real, speak." Nothing happened. Until exactly 3:33 a.m. All 12 patients sat upright in their beds simultaneously. Their mouths hung open. Blood trickled from their eyes. The heart monitors shrieked. The lights turned red. From every mouth, the same phrase echoed. "She hears us now." The ward doors slammed shut. Olivia ran to the panel, but the lock was jammed. The patients began turning their heads slowly, all at once, following her with dead eyes. One by one, they began to speak and scream. Voices poured from them, hundreds, maybe thousands. Children crying, men chanting, women shrieking prayers backward. Some voices screamed in languages Olivia didn't recognize, while others simply whispered her name over and over again. She collapsed on the floor, hands over her ears, sobbing. Then came silence. When she opened her eyes, the ward was empty. Every bed, gone. The doors opened. Security found her huddled in the fetal position. The next day, the hospital claimed there had been a gas leak in 9C. Patients had been moved, though no record of where. Olivia's badge access was revoked. She was placed on administrative leave for hallucinations and delusional behavior. She checked herself into another hospital the following week. But every night since, she hears those voices when the lights go out. Her recorder still plays back the entire event, except it now has 13 voices. The last one is hers. It says, "The silence is broken. I am with them now." Story number 3. St. Elora General Hospital stood like a skeleton of history on the edge of the city. Once the largest and most respected medical facility in the region, it had slowly become a decaying echo of itself. Half the wings closed, elevators unreliable, and entire floors sealed off without explanation. Nurse Michael Talbot transferred there after losing his job at a more modern hospital due to budget cuts. St. Elora wasn't anyone's first choice, but it was hiring. The staff was strange, quiet, nervous, always looking over their shoulders. They told him one thing on his first night: "Don't answer the call from room 616. He laughed it off as hazing. But when he checked the hospital's directory, room 616 wasn't listed. In fact, the entire 6th floor had been closed for over 20 years after a fire. The hallway had been sealed with a thick metal door welded shut. Michael's assignment was the night shift on the 5th floor, mostly elderly patients, post-surgery recoveries, and a few comatose cases. Uneventful, quiet, until 3:16 a.m. That was the first time the nurse station's call light blinked red, labeled 616. He stared at it for a long time. Impossible. He ignored it. The next night, it blinked again. This time, the overhead speaker crackled, and a woman's voice rasped through, "Help me!" There in the walls. He ran to the head nurse, but she refused to make eye contact. "It happens sometimes. Just don't go near the 6th floor. Ever." Michael wasn't someone who believed in ghosts. He was a man of science, a skeptic. But when the call light returned a third time, this time with screaming in the background, he made a decision that changed everything. He found the old stairwell. It was blocked off by a gate, but the chain was rusted. With enough effort, he slipped through and climbed to the 6th floor. The smell hit him first: mold, rust, and something sour like spoiled meat. The lights were out, but his flashlight showed long, dark streaks down the hallway walls, something between blood and soot. The doors were warped. Scratches dug deep into their surfaces. Some had been kicked in, others held shut by chains and nailed planks. Every room number had been removed, except one. 616. The door hung slightly open, and behind it was a gaping blackness. He stepped inside. The room was freezing. The window had been bricked over. Medical equipment from the 1980s stood in rusting silence. Restraints hung from the sides of the bed. On the far wall, in smeared red paint, were the words, "She never left." A monitor clicked on. Heart rate monitor, 56 BPM. Michael froze. There was no one in the bed, but the machine was tracking something. Then he heard it, a dragging sound behind him. When he turned, a woman stood in the doorway, hospital gown, head tilted, blackened lips. Her eyes were sewn shut. She whispered, "You shouldn't be here." He stumbled back. The woman didn't move, but behind her, The hallway was crawling with others. Shadowy patients twitching, crawling, sobbing. They didn't have faces, just stretched, smooth skin where their features should be. The room door slammed shut on its own. The machines began to beep wildly. A voice came over the speaker again, inside the room this time. "Welcome back, Dr. Harper." Michael's blood ran cold. He wasn't Harper. He didn't know a Harper. The restraints on the bed snapped open as if inviting him in. The lights flickered and, for a moment, he saw the room as it once was. Doctors in bloodied coats, screaming nurses, a patient convulsing in the bed as a priest read Latin. Then darkness again. He ran. The hallway stretched longer and longer. The 6th floor wouldn't let him go. Every door he passed opened violently, revealing horrors. Children with missing limbs sobbing on the ceiling. A nurse stabbing herself repeatedly while smiling. A man sewn into the mattress, still breathing. Then silence. He found the stairwell again and burst through, falling 2 stories down to the 4th floor. He awoke in the ER. Broken ribs. Dislocated shoulder. They told him he had a fall. That no 6th floor existed. That he was delirious. But in his pocket he found a room key. 616. Rusted and old. He quit that night. But every few months, he receives a call on his personal phone. It's always at 3:16 a.m. And it always says the same thing. "We're still waiting, Dr. Harper." Story number 4. Janet Alvarez had worked as a trauma nurse for 12 years before transferring to Pinefield Medical Center. It was an older hospital tucked into a wooded part of Pennsylvania, barely renovated since the 70s, with flickering fluorescent lights, long echoing hallways, and an elevator system that groaned with every use. She was hired to work the night shift in the ICU on the 8th floor. The hospital officially had 8 floors, but on her first week, she noticed something strange. The elevator panel had a faint outline where a 9 should be. It had clearly been removed, filed down or covered, like someone had wanted to erase the number entirely. Curiously, in the supply closet on the 8th floor, there was a second staircase leading up, but the door at the top was always locked. Janet didn't think much of it until she caught an elderly patient, Mr. Reginald Harthorne, muttering about the nurses from the 9th. He was delirious from medication, but his words were unnerving. "They smile too wide, too white. They feed on the breath. They came when I died once. But I came back." Later that night, Janet checked his records. He had flatlined for 4 minutes during surgery 2 years ago. The next night, a code blue was called in room 824. A middle-aged woman named Sandra Voss had gone into sudden cardiac arrest. Janet assisted in resuscitation. After 10 minutes, Sandra gasped back to life, eyes wild, screaming, "Don't let them take me back up there." Janet held her hand. "Back where?" Sandra whispered. "The 9th. I saw it. You think it's not real, but it's there." From then on, Janet noticed a disturbing pattern. Every patient who flatlined and returned would mention something about a 9th floor. Sometimes a hallway with no end. Sometimes screams behind locked doors. Sometimes they described nurses and doctors who didn't blink, didn't speak, but smiled too wide and stood too still. She started researching the hospital's history. In 1974, there had been a 9th floor reserved for mental patients. A fire had broken out in one of the patient rooms. The entire floor was consumed in under 10 minutes. 43 patients and 5 staff members died. Rather than rebuild, the hospital sealed the floor completely. Or so they claimed. Janet became obsessed. One night, at 3:33 a.m., she stood outside the old stairwell door behind the supply closet. The padlock was gone. The door creaked open on its own. She climbed the stairs. The lights flickered as she reached the top. Dust covered everything, but the hallway looked lived in. The walls were yellowed but intact. The floor wasn't crumbling. It was freshly waxed, and it was quiet. Too quiet. There were hospital beds in the hallway, filled with patients turned to face the wall, motionless. Monitors beeped with no power source. IVs dripped into veins that didn't bleed. From the end of the hallway came footsteps. Janet turned to see 3 nurses. Identical uniforms. Identical faces. Their skin looked waxy, almost plastic. Their teeth were too large. Their eyes didn't reflect light. One of them raised a clipboard and said, "We've been expecting you, Nurse Alvarez." She ran. She didn't look back until she reached the stairwell. The moment she crossed the threshold, the door slammed behind her. She never told anyone what she saw, but her badge had changed. Where it once said ICU, Floor 8, it now read, Special Assignment, Floor 9. Every night since, at exactly 3:33 a.m., she receives a page from a room that doesn't exist. Room 913. The message always reads the same. Admission complete. Nurse on duty, Alvarez. She tried to quit. She transferred twice, even changed states. But every hospital she enters, no matter how new or far, has a mysterious 9th floor no one talks about. And her badge always updates, because once you've walked those halls, the 9th floor never lets you go.